for Representative McGee, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Representative McGee. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. I'm Representative Michael Bose of Epping, and as chair of the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a full committee work session of bills referred to the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. Executive session on pending legislation may be held at any time. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting, also by the Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the general website. The notice for this meeting complies with House rules and RSA 91-A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@ledge.state.nh.us. In the event that the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Staff assisting us with the meeting today includes Jennifer Four, our committee researcher. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call for attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting. That's required under the right to know law. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Representative Thomas, are you here?
I'm present, safe in my basement below.
There's some strange background noise.
No, I just get bounced. What the hell?
Can't hear.
Mr. Chairman, we can't hear what's going on there.
Get a speaker closer to me. Hear me now. Can you hear me? Are we of you?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. I'll go over the ones that didn't answer, see if they can hear me. Harrington, Representative Harrington.
Here.
Oh, okay. Representative Daughter. Representative Ploget.
Present at my home with the wife in the house.
Right.
Oh, I should have added my wife's floating around here too.
Representative White.
I am here, and I am by myself.
Representative Sunsich.
I'm here at my home and my wife is in the house somewhere.
Representative Kelly Pitts.
I'm here with my computer coach, my grandson in Greenland, and the dog.
Representative Mann,
I'm here, I'm at home, no one else here.
Representative Arsenal,
Present, I'm alone in the room.
Representative Vincent. Representative Vincent. Representative McGee,
I'm present and I'm home alone.
Representative McWilliams. Representative McWilliams.
I'm here, I'm home alone.
Okay. Representative Creechin. Representative Creechin. Representative Pimentel.
Here in a room at home alone.
3 missing, so we've got 18 present.
You missed one.
Oh, right, yes, I did. I keep doing that because I have to skip them at the beginning. The Chairman Vose.
Chairman Vose is here in the committee room. Thank you.
Okay, you missed 2.
Okay. I went, let's go through the ones I didn't answer. Representative Notter. Representative Vincent. Representative Creechin. Who did I miss? Representative Paschal.
Yes, I am here in my room alone.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah.
Chair?
Brezhny too.
Oh, just here. Got it.
Representative,
Mr. Chair?
You've been called.
I was trying to get.
okay. I guess we're all set.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Thomas.
Yes, I just have a question. On my screen, I'm showing the name of Brad Greenland. Could you clarify that?
I can clarify, Representative Thomas. Brad is my colleague, and he's going to be stepping in about 9:45. So he's just arrived early. I've got another meeting that I need to attend with education at 10.
Okay, thank you. I just needed to know that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question before we begin?
Representative Oxenden, what's your question?
Yes, is it possible for our committee to have a briefing from the governor's office about the proposals having to do with the Department of Energy, particularly as it regards the PUC?
Department of Energy and HB2. I've seen a presentation that they have given to House Finance and other groups of people. I'll see if they would be willing to come and give that same presentation to us. I can't give you a date for that, but I'll see if I can make that happen. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the agenda.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman?
Excuse me, Representative Harrington, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking those handouts we got from the governor's people last week, maybe if they could be distributed to the committee, that would be a good step. The charts that they gave us, because that 65 pages is pretty confusing. Those handouts might be helpful for everybody in the committee to get, you know, the ones I'm referring to.
That's a good suggestion, Representative Harrington. I don't have those slides in electronic format at the moment, but I can try to get them from.
If you'd like, I can get them and just distribute them.
Mr. Chairman, some of the others were promised, like me, I haven't seen them, so if they could be distributed to the committee as a whole, that'd be great.
As I just indicated to Representative Harrington, I will do my best to make that happen.
Yep.
I do not have them in electronic format at the moment, and that's the way most people receive information from the committee these days.
If you'd like, I could get those for and then distribute them, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Harrington, I'll task you with that. I appreciate your taking that on. Thank you. So we will get you the slides from the governor's office about the new Department of Energy. I don't know how useful they will be without someone to explain what the slides mean, but we'll get them to you anyway, and we'll try to arrange a presentation by the governor's office.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So let's talk now about the agenda for today. I have made arrangements to get a couple of folks from ISO New England to come and talk to us starting at 10 o'clock this morning about the transmission system in New England.
Oh, great.
They're going to explain to us just exactly how they administer the transmission network in New England, and they're going to explain to us what the impacts are of energy efficiency and renewable energy on transmission costs. They will be here at 10 o'clock. I believe they're available until about 11:30, and they'll give us a presentation, and then they'll take our questions. So we'll have plenty of time to ask them questions about transmission costs, which is an important topic that comes up over and over in our public hearings and our other discussions. So I think it's worthwhile to see what ISO New England has to say on that topic. So we'll do that at 10 o'clock. Between now and then, we need to transact some business. As I indicated in an email that I sent to all of you earlier, we did discover a typo in the amendment we adopted to House Bill 315. It was a simple one-word strike-through of the word provide, but that's an important part of the amendment, and we really need to fix that error. So I have asked OLS to draft a new amendment, which I sent to you all. It's 2021-0748H. And what I would like to do this morning is open an executive session on HB 315. I will make a motion to reconsider HB 315. If that motion passes, I will then make a motion to adopt the amendment 2021-0748H. And presumably that will pass, and we will then readopt the
Now you're on mute.
amendment.
I'll second the motion.
Bill ought to pass as amended.
Who's second?
I'll
Representative
second the motion.
Kelly Pitts?
Well, I haven't opened the executive session yet, but make sure to call on you, Representative Kelly Pitts. So that's the main piece of business that I would like to conduct between now and 10 o'clock. I had originally hoped that we would be able to have a working session today on House Bill 106. Unfortunately, after we retained that bill a week or so ago, I did not explicitly enough, apparently, say to the clerk and the committee admin that I wanted to hold on to that bill. And the bill got transmitted to the House clerk as retained. And that apparently is an action that cannot be retracted or undone. I had a lengthy telephone conversation with the House clerk, and he explained to me that we can no longer take any action on House Bill 106 until the Speaker gives us permission to deal with retained bills. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to bring forth any amendments on HB 106 this morning. We can't even really discuss it because the Speaker hasn't given us permission to discuss retained bills. I will point out, however, that Senate Bill 109, which should arrive in our committee in another week or two, is very, very similar to House Bill 106. So we will get a second bite at that apple. And we can hopefully come up with a compromise position on Senate Bill 109 that we can all live with and that the Senate will accept. So we will plan to have a lengthy discussion about that bill. Of course, we'll have a public hearing on it as well. And then we'll have a work session. We'll try to come up with a way to create a compromise that makes as many people happy as possible. So that's the plan. Representative Samsic, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm really disappointed that we can't talk about HB 106 today. As you well know, you assured us that we would have that opportunity and you would retain this bill. And I can certainly understand that mistakes can be made. However, it is an issue that has come up in the House sessions as well, where I believe the speaker has made several mistakes, where the remedy seemed to be, I apologize for my mistake, but I can't revert or mitigate those mistakes. I think these are acts that tend to generate a lot of mistrust, and I think it's not a good thing for us. We should be generating more trust among each other and not mistrust. So I'm disappointed about this, and I think it doesn't do us very much good here that these things happen. And when they do happen, there must be a remediation effort done. And if the only remediation is to say, sorry, we made a mistake, you can't do anything about it, that's not very satisfactory. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Samsic. I did apologize to the committee in my email for the mistake that caused the miscommunication that caused this mistake. I'll apologize again here in person for making that mistake. And in my defense, I'll point out that I'm a new committee chair. We have a new committee clerk. We have a new committee vice chair. And it's inevitable that a mistake is going to happen on occasion. It's also inevitable given the format in which we are conducting our business, where I haven't even spoken in person to our committee admin since the glitches like this. And I apologize once again for the fact that it happened, but it did happen, so now we just have to deal with it. Representative Platt, you're recognized.
Yes, I would just say that the circumstances under which we are living this year with the COVID situation does not help communications at all. And so I think that the mistake that was made is understandable, and I won't want to dwell on it. And I just remember the last 2 years with lots of stuff I didn't like. Just leave it there.
Thank you, Representative Callie Pitts.
All I wanted to say was I had called the clerk on this, and that is irreversible. And that I think that in this committee, we are polite to each other, but I think we have to pay more attention to each other instead of trying to think ahead. And I think that's normal under these circumstances with Zoom. And I thank God we're all human, because we've all made mistakes and we will probably continue to make mistakes. But we will be dealing with 106 in September or before, if the speaker allows. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Callie Pitts. So with that said, what I would like to do now is convene an executive session on House Bill 315. And having voted on the prevailing side, I move that we reconsider our vote on HB 315. Representative Callie Pitts.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we reconsider our vote on HB 315. This reconsideration is for the purpose of adopting a new amendment that corrects an error in the amendment that we adopted previously. And I would ask you all to vote in the affirmative on this motion. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I ask the House Clerk to call the roll on the motion to reconsider House Bill 315.
Representative Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Notter. Is she present yet? No. Representative Werner. Representative Berejny.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi.
Yes.
Representative Cambrose.
Yes.
Representative Nojer.
Yes.
Yes.
Sumsich.
Yes.
Representative Callie Pitts.
Yes.
Representative Mann.
Yes.
Representative Oxenham.
Yes.
Representative Vincent. Not present yet. Representative McGee.
Yes.
Representative Williams.
Yes.
Representative Creature. Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Paschal.
Yes.
And the chairman.
Chair votes yes.
Okay. And the 2 abstentions, 19 yes.
By a,
3, 18 yes.
thank you. By a vote of 18-0, the motion to reconsider HB 315 passes.
Mr. Chair, point of order, please.
Go ahead.
Okay. For the record, Representative Platt, there are no abstentions in a vote. If you could just, make sure that doesn't get recorded that way.
It's recorded as 1803 absences.
Absences, yes, thank you.
I misspoke.
Thank you for that clarification, Representative Thomas. Okay, I now move the adoption of Amendment 2021-0748H. Representative Callie Pitts.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt Amendment 2021-0748H. There are copies here in the committee room for those of you who are here, and I sent a copy of this amendment to everyone via email. I hope everyone has had a chance to look at it. The only change that this amendment makes is on page 1, line 5. In the previous amendment, the word provide had a strike through it. In this amendment, the word provide has no strike through. That is the amendment that we intended to adopt last time around, but none of us noticed that typographical error. Matthew Fossum, an attorney for Eversource, has verified that this amendment is the correct one. The Honorable Clifton Buelow of the City of Lebanon has also verified that this amendment is the correct one. Henry Herndon of Clean Energy New Hampshire has also verified that this amendment is the correct one. I have been through it myself, and I verify that it is the amendment that we all agreed to in our stakeholder process to develop this amendment for this bill. Does anyone else have any comments that they would like to make about this amendment? Representative Oxenham. Representative Oxenham, did you have a comment? I thought I saw your hand go up.
Yes, I'm sorry. I muted myself when I thought I unmuted myself. First, Henry Herndon is no longer with Clean Energy New Hampshire. He's with the, I believe it's called the Community Power Alliance. And secondly, I know for my part, I didn't think it was a typo or missed the typo. I thought that was part of the compromise. And I bring this up because when we have these continual amendments and we bring in an outside authority such as Cliff Buelow, it's all too easy to assume that the changes that were made are the ones that have been vetted. And I wanted to reiterate that how careful we need to be when we have multi-page amendments. And I believe that one came in the morning of the session where we considered it, did it not?
No, that is not correct. That was sent to you at least 3 or 4 days ahead of time.
Okay, just then as a final point, as we go forward, it would be really useful if we always try to have these out several days ahead of time so that people do have time to really give them the fine tooth comb, because trying to read over this to ensure that provide really was the only change was a really difficult task. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Oxenham. I will say that the stakeholder process involves a lot of people. And we had multiple versions of the amendment text floating around. In that kind of a situation, it's easy for this kind of mistake to get made, unfortunately. And I'm glad we caught it when we did. I could have left that mistake, I could have let it ride and asked the Senate to fix it, but that just didn't seem right to me. If we know we have a mistake, it's our bill, it seems to me it's up to us to fix the mistake, not try to pass that task off to somebody else. So that's why I initiated this process this morning to readopt the amendment and adopt the correct amendment. Is there any other discussion on this amendment? Representative Platt.
I'll just point out that the circumstances we're living under because of COVID also affects our relationship with OLS. It's harder for them to do their job. And so mistakes happen if we fix them.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the amendment 2021-0748H. Mr. Clerk.
Representative Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Notter, not here. Representative Murner.
Yes.
Representative Platt votes yes. Representative Berejny.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi.
Yes.
Representative Cambrils.
Yes.
Representative Ploget.
Yes.
Representative White. Still on here?
Yes.
Oh, okay, you are. Representative Sumsich.
Yes.
Representative Mann. Representative Kelly Pitts, rather.
Yes.
Representative Mann. Representative Oxenham.
Yes.
Representative Vincent. Representative McGee.
Yes.
Representative McWilliams.
Yes.
Representative Creechin. Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Marshall.
Yes.
The chairman.
Chair votes yes.
Come on, Cuomo. Walk.
Did Representative Mann's vote get recorded because he was on mute?
And how do you vote?
I voted yes.
I didn't hear you.
Okay, thank you.
You were on mute.
Okay, I'm marking it now. So we have Representatives Notter. I'm saying it out loud. Representatives Notter,
Vincent and Creechin.
He wasn't present.
Representative McWilliams, were you here? Did you vote?
I voted yes.
Okay. I have to make sure, I have to do this again, sorry. I'll go through it again and make sure I have it right. Representative Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Notter. Representative Murner.
Hello.
Representative Berejny.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi.
Yes.
Representative Cambrils.
Yes.
Representative Ploget.
Yes.
White.
Yes. Tom, your mic is making a lot of background noise, by
Representative
the way.
Representative Somsich.
Yes.
Representative Kelly Pitts.
Yes.
Representative Mann.
Yes.
Representative Oxenham.
Yes.
Representative Vincent. Representative McGee.
Yes.
Representative McWilliams.
Yes.
Representative Creechin. Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Partial.
Yes.
And Chairman votes
Chair votes yes.
1803.
Okay, by a vote of 18 to nothing, Amendment 2021-0748H is adopted. I now move that we pass HB 315 as adopted. Representative Callie Pitts. Representative Somsich.
That's amended.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt HB 315 OTP/A. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Representative Thomas.
Sorry for being a stickler, but since this is being recorded for the record, the motion should be adopt HB 315 as amended, not as adopted.
Okay, thank you for that correction.
And for the record, that's what I have on the roster.
Thank you. So we're voting on the motion to adopt HB 315 as amended. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of the adoption of HB 315 as amended.
Representative Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Notter, not present. Representative Murner.
Yes.
Representative Plant votes yes. Representative Berejny.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi.
Yes.
Representative White.
Yes.
Representative Somsich.
Yes.
Representative Callie Pitts.
Yes.
Representative Mann.
Yes.
Representative Oxenham.
Yes.
Representative Vincent. Representative McGee.
Yes.
Representative McWilliams.
Yes.
Representative Pritchett. Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Paschal.
Yes.
And the chairman.
Chair votes yes.
Okay.
Did you record Jay's response?
Is my mic, Mr. Chairman?
I heard it. Speak.
Okay.
Representative Ploget.
I vote yes.
May have been on mute.
I vote yes.
Okay, by a vote of 18 to nothing, HB 315 is passed OTP-A, passed as amended. And I thank you all for your patience and your understanding in making sure that we do this right. I feel very confident at this point that we can turn this bill over to the clerk and be confident that it is correct. Thanks to all of you.
Chairman,
Representative Platt is recognized.
since it's 1803, could this go on consent?
Well, when we tried that before, Representative Callie Pitts objected. We could ask her again if she objects to that. Representative Callie Pitts, are you there? She may have stepped out of the room.
I would object.
Okay, Representative Oxenden would object, so it will not go on consent. Representative Oxenden, did you have your hand up? Did you want to speak?
Yes, I do. It's on a different matter. I can wait until you've completed the action on this bill, sir.
Okay, thank you. So I will now close the executive session on HB 315. And once again, thanks to everybody. Now I'll recognize Representative Oxenden.
Thank you very much. Earlier, you said that the speaker has to give us permission to discuss retained bills before we can do that. Am I correct? Did I hear you correctly?
You did hear me correctly. That is what the clerk told me in our conversation, telephone conversation yesterday or the day before.
because I was wondering about possibly getting in some expert speakers that we could begin to explore some of the issues that will be coming up on retained bill. Would that be possible during this interim period that we have before us?
Yes, in fact, we're starting that process today by having a presentation on transmission costs by ISO and Windland. And Representative Somsich and I have been discussing the possibility of bringing in some folks who understand the intricacies of financing renewable energy projects to explain to us just exactly how those projects get financed and put together. I think that would be useful information for the committee to have. And as soon as we can pull that together, I will arrange a work session for us to have that discussion.
It's a slight difference here that I was trying to make sure that I wasn't stepping on any toes, that these are presentations on general topics, whereas say the broadband bill, if we wanted to have somebody come in and talk to us about broadband, if we might be out of order because we were discussing something that was in a retained bill and we had not yet received permission to do so from the speaker. So it's my understanding that it's okay to proceed with inviting such experts and then try to set up a time. Would that be with you or would that be with the clerk or the vice chair?
It would go through me, and we can do that as you suggest.
Thank you so much.
Representative Thomas and I would work together along with Representative Somsich to make those events happen. We'll try to put some of those together. I will alert you, though, to the fact that very soon now we will start receiving bills from the Senate. And once we receive those bills, we'll need to start scheduling public hearings for those bills so that we can take care of that business as expeditiously as possible. So that may delay, if you will, any discussions we have with outside experts about other issues, but we'll work it all in as best we can over the course of the next few weeks. And we'll get our work done, no question about it. Speaking of that, I would remind you all that the speaker has scheduled 3 House sessions for April 7, 8, and 9, which are a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. A Friday session is unusual, but not unprecedented, according to the speaker. And all 3 of those sessions will be held at the Bedford Sports Complex, same place we met on February 24th and 25th. And the speaker has indicated that the session we had there on the 24th and 25th uncovered some issues with being able to hear participants who are spread out over such a large area. And so the speaker's office is trying to take actions to allow all persons in attendance at the sessions on April 7, 8, and 9 to be able to be recognized and heard whenever they want to speak. So hopefully we will avoid some of the problems that we had on February 24th and 25th. Representative McGee.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question. I had heard recently, normally we have a budget overview for the House before we have to vote on the budget. And I know that there's a sort of a question floating out there. So I was just wondering if you had heard anything in leadership about whether we will have a review of what's in the budget before we have to vote.
I haven't heard any specific talk about that. I do know from past experience that there will be a budget presentation, but it hasn't been scheduled yet to my knowledge. And I don't know when it will be scheduled. I'm not sure if we will be voting on the budget on April 7, 8, or 9. That's not clear to me, but I'll try to get an answer to that question and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Another thing that that we all need to keep in mind with regard to the session coming up on April 7, 8, and 9 is that we need to be careful with our floor debates. We have an awful lot of bills to deal with and a lot of ground to cover on those 3 days. And while apparently we have that facility from 9 in the morning till 6 in the evening, it still may not be enough time if we get carried away with our floor debates. So I would urge everyone on the committee to plan carefully your floor debates. Make sure that your floor speeches are as succinct as possible. Make your 1, 2, or 3 points as quickly as you can so that the events of the day can move along and proceed in an expeditious fashion. We don't really, I don't think, benefit from long floor speeches. Most people have already made up their mind about how they're going to vote on the bill before we get to the floor. So a lot of people say they pay more attention to PIs than they do to floor speeches. So I just ask everybody to think about that as they plan their floor speeches for the upcoming session. Now we're going to have ISO New England here in about 20 minutes. Are there any topics that any of you would like to discuss between now and 10 o'clock? Seeing none, I guess maybe we can take a break. Let's take a 15-minute break and reassemble at 5 minutes of 10. Time we will begin the presentation by ISO New England. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good morning, Representative Harrington. Is my mic a little better now, Michael? I was having trouble earlier with that.
Yeah, there's like a background like hum.
Still there, right?
Like, yeah, it's still there.
Okay, I'm by myself in a room. There's nothing around. It might be some electronics. I'll check it out again. Thanks.
My suspicion on that might be coming from the desk in the chambers. Somebody is not close to the mic right now, but when they start, perhaps, when they move up to the microphone, that goes away. So I suspect it's from the chambers. But good luck hunting it down.
First time I did it from home, so, and I might be stepping away if I have a phone call, so I apologize for that.
Hey, Tom.
Good day.
Hey, how you doing?
Sorry, Rochelle. Lewis. Is it Lewis?
Lucius.
Lucius.
Yes. Hey, tell me something. Are you new this year?
Yes, I am.
How are you finding the experience?
I'm actually liking it. The thing I'm liking is I used to be in research and getting these bills, going through everything. That's what I like. But I'm trying to stay away from this partisanship. So.
Well, I'm kind of feeling the same way, I got to be honest. It is a wake-up call walking into that hall and hearing a lot of that. I'd like to think that we all like to think we're fair-minded, I guess. But boy, there's a lot to learn, though, I feel like. I mean, personally, I don't know if you feel that way. It's a lot of information coming down on this.
Yes, I've been going to a lot of former reps, so I don't bias myself with the ones voting this year. So I reached out to some of the former reps, and especially my district, and I thought I was going to be in another committee, and it was a fit for me in this one, so I came here. So.
Where are you from again? What town?
I'm in Center Harbor representing that New Hampton, Belknap 1.
Okay, yeah.
Once again, my mic, is that still working?
Is your what?
My microphone, I had background noise.
I'm still hearing, but I don't know if that's you or not.
Okay.
It's when you don't talk. There's like a background hum that kicks in and it overrides the room mic. So we can't hear when he's calling for some reason.
Yeah, I couldn't hear my bolt coming through when I was waiting. So that was probably why.
There's a setting that you can do on Zoom where you can select how much background noise you allow.
Yeah, I tried all three of them and didn't seem to change it.
Okay.
That's why I asked a few times, and nothing seemed to change it. Even if it's still there now, if I'm quiet. Cat's in.
Maybe you need a little cradle for your microphone.
Oh.
I don't think most.
Yeah, I'm expecting a phone. I was asked to stay by my phone today for family business, and so that's why I'm here. Then I see the room; it's almost empty, so I wasn't the only one.
I think people are looking to a short day today. I don't know if we're going to go past noon. I don't know.
That's right. I was thinking of 106 was going to be discussed too, and I forgot it was caught into being retained.
Yeah, that was a disappointment.
Yeah, in my notes I had both of them, so I forgot about that. If I didn't write it down. So, Kat's talking, but she has
Isn't that funny?
I didn't notice you.
I was just going to say, note to self, if we vote to retain, the bill's going to be retained. We shouldn't have voted. We should have left it in committee if we really wanted to leave it in committee. But yeah, I hope that we get to ask more from the ISO New England just about the transmission costs. I want to learn about that, but there's a lot more like grid security and stability and what percentage of renewables on the system creates instability. Like they do reporting on all kinds of really interesting topics that we should be more informed on. So I hope it's not just limited to that, although our percentage of the transmission costs has gone up. And so I also would like to know what that 10.5 or 10.8 equates to in dollars, because we should understand that, I think.
Representative McGee, it's my experience in dealing with ISO New England that when they're asked to give a presentation about a particular subject, that's all they prepare for. So hopefully we can stick to the transmission portion of there because if we ask other diverse questions, that person may not have been the one to deal in that. So we But if we want to have more information, I'm sure they would say they can get someone else to come in and answer some questions. Also, in the past, before, if we've had more questions,
Need a knife?
we have been asked to submit them and that they would get back to us as well. So hopefully that will be the case this time.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll be able to field whatever question. I mean, if we get an answer, we don't get an answer, but they're here, so.
All right, let's get started again. Excuse me.
We can,
Brad Greenland, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Brad, would you elevate Mr. Johnson, or maybe you already did? Did you have?
I just promoted him.
he's on mute.
Okay, Mr. Johnson is there. Okay. So we can now resume our session. And I will ask Eric Johnson from ISO New England to take the floor and talk to us about transmission costs in New England, how they're allocated amongst the states, and how they affect energy efficiency and renewable energy in our state. So, Mr. Johnson, welcome to the New Hampshire House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. We look forward to hearing from you this morning, and you are free to take it away.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Just want to do a quick audio check. Can you hear me clearly?
We can. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. I dialed in just a few minutes before I was introduced. I understand there's an interest in a few other topics. I'll do my best to answer those today or follow up as needed to assist the committee. For the record, my name is Eric Johnson. I'm Director of External Affairs for ISO New England, based in Holyoke. And I missed the opportunity to wake up at 5 in the morning to make the trip to Concord, but hopefully at some point in the future, we'll be back and grab a cup of coffee across the street and visit you in person. I was asked to talk about transmission costs, how they're allocated to the states. And when we talk about transmission, just to clarify, we're talking about the bulk transmission system, which is the high voltage wires in the region. We're not talking about the poles and wires in a local community, which make up the distribution system. So I just want to set that distinction. The transmission costs are not allocated directly to the states. So I just wanted to make that clear up front. We can show an approximation of what that is on a state-by-state basis. And I think that's helpful to see what that looks like region-wide. We've presented a similar set of data in the past, but currently, if you think of the allocation of the cost, it's based on something called the network load in the region. And it's essentially the amount of electricity that's being consumed across the New England electric grid. And our grid is a tightly integrated system, so everything from Maine to Connecticut and all the states are in between are interconnected. And then we have interconnections to our neighbors, but we're only talking about the transmission system within the New England borders. And so the network load for New Hampshire for 2019, as an example, was 9.5%. Now that number is relatively constant over time. We don't see significant shifts in the regional network load in any of the states. I'll give you the numbers for the other states, and I'm happy to provide this in writing if it's helpful. So I mentioned New Hampshire is 9.5%. Connecticut is 25.5%. Massachusetts is the largest at 45.8%. Vermont at 4%. Rhode Island at 6.3%. And Maine at 8.9%. So if you think of those percentages, the largest would be Massachusetts, followed by Connecticut, followed by New Hampshire, followed by Maine, than Rhode Island and Vermont. And I was also asked how transmission relates to the renewables. And if you think about the renewables that are coming onto the system in New England, we have large scale grid connected resources. Those could be gas fired generation, which we've seen over the past decade, or more recently, we're seeing wind-based projects, onshore and offshore wind. Projects that are grid connected, the large generators, they don't tend to impact the regional network load because they come onto the grid as supply. They're putting power onto the system. But we also see a lot of distributed resources across the region, and much of that is solar right now, the PV resources. And you can think of the rooftop solar arrays. Most of those are being sponsored by state incentive programs. So a customer would put a solar installation on their home or their building, and that does not look like supply to the ISO. It looks like a reduction in electricity demand. So we would generally say they are behind the meter resources. So as we are managing the electricity consumption on the grid, we're starting to see that the grid demand drops on a day when you have sunshine, like today, as the customers who would normally be using power from the grid are now sourcing some of their energy directly from those solar resources. And so it looks like a reduction in the demand on the grid. So the regional network load, coming back to that concept, the large scale grid connected resources don't have an impact, but the smaller resources would, the behind the meter resources would. So they would, in effect, reduce the load on the system. So that's one of the ways it would have an impact. You could also draw a similar correlation to an energy efficiency, which, like rooftop solar, is an installation of a device or a measure on the customer side of the meter. And when you roll up all of the energy efficiency across New England to the ISO, it looks like a reduction in demand on the grid, just the way it does for that customer who's installed typically a more efficient lighting system, or could be a chiller at a larger facility. So those are some of the initial thoughts on the concept of how costs are allocated, not directly to the states, but we can roll up the charges that the states incur. And you can think of a state like Connecticut would have two customers for transmission primarily. It would be Eversource and United Illuminating. And then in New Hampshire, it would be PSNH and any of the other utilities operating in the state. And then we roll up all of the utilities in each state to give you the figures that I had mentioned before. So the ISO doesn't have a way to bill states. We allocate these costs to the utilities. They collect the revenue that they need through a rate that's approved by the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So that is not set by the ISO. The ISO is really provides a settlement function of collecting those costs, and we would make the payments to the transmission companies that have made the investments in the transmission system. So I know there were some other questions, but I think I could maybe stop there and see if that is helpful, and if you want to expand or ask any other related questions.
Thank you. Representative Platt is recognized for a question.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, great to see you again, or hear from you anyway. I used to go to ISO New England all the time, new pool meetings. Some states are trying to increase net metering in an attempt, transmission costs and transmission costs, but in an attempt to reduce the percentage from a particular state, so that the cost shift, the burden is on other states. From what you're saying, any attempt like that hasn't really been successful because it's pretty steady. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, Representative Plett, it's nice to see you and to address you as representative, having worked with you at many of the regional stakeholder meetings. I don't see you on camera, so I assume you might be in the large building.
I am.
Large meeting room. Okay, very good.
You don't see me on camera.
Yep. If we think about energy efficiency as an example, Massachusetts historically has been ranked first in the country, and they've been back and forth in first place with California for investments in energy efficiency. And they're trying to do that to make sure they're more efficient and controlling their energy consumption and giving customers tools to do that. So they would be one of the most aggressive in terms of the state policy for implementing energy efficiency, but they would be doing that based on their own objectives. There's no requirements at the ISO level for states to invest in energy efficiency or take actions like that might affect the transmission costs. So we may observe that some states spend more than others on energy efficiency, but we don't have a direct role in that. Now, it is possible, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud, if some of the states in the region invest heavily in energy efficiency and others don't invest in energy efficiency, you could see a shift in the cost because they would be in effect reducing the regional network load within their state. But we've seen a lot of investment in energy efficiency for many, many years in the region, and we haven't seen these numbers shift dramatically. So I think you have to make your own determination on whether or not there's a cost shift for the investments that are made in any one technology, whether it's efficiency or solar PV.
Well, if there were a concerted effort by a particular state to reduce its pro rata share of the transmission by aggressive net metering would ISO New England let that stand, or would it redefine how the load is allocated, how the transmission is allocated?
We do not have a role in that. As I mentioned, our only role in this space is to provide the settlement function. So the money would be collected by the ISO, and then it would be paid to the companies that are building the transmission and operating the transmission system. So as I mentioned, the rates for the regional network service are all subject to review and approval by FERC. So they're developed by the transmission owners. It goes to FERC. There's information about it that's posted on the ISO website, and we provide the settlement, which is just the exchange of money. It's a transaction, but we don't have any policy in this area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. I have a question for you. We hear in testimony before this committee over and over again that the adoption of certain policies regarding energy efficiency or renewable energy reduces our transmission load and therefore our transmission costs. Is there any way to measure those reduced costs and or that reduced load?
We do publish the monthly regional network load data, and we've shared that with the committee in the past, and I believe, Chairman, that's a file that you had shared with us in advance asking for some perspectives on, and it's publicly available. And what you could do is look back in time at New Hampshire's share of the network load relative to each of the other states. So the numbers I gave you are an annual snapshot for the region, but you can look at that on a monthly basis. But the trend over many years is there's a little bit of fluctuation month to month, but there could be other things driving that as well. It could be variations in the weather within the region that drive the consumption in southern New England versus some of the northern New England states. There may be other factors. So it's hard to draw out an inference that energy efficiency explicitly is causing the changes in the regional network load over time. You would have to make some assumptions to unpack that data. The information we're showing is simply what we see on the grid. We can't look behind the meter to figure out how much is energy efficiency versus how much is, other things that are driving demand for power.
So if I understood you correctly, you're saying, and I have looked at that monthly load data, you're saying that there are a variety of causes to explain the ups and downs on a monthly basis of the load. Some of it could be renewable energy or energy efficiency, but other reasons could include the weather and other variables. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Representative McGee is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for coming to speak with us today. My question is how the ISO New England views the load reduction from behind the meter assets in terms of grid reliability, because I know you put out reports very often. That's your primary charge as an ISO, and I just wondered how those changes in the management of the grid are perceived by the ISO. Because I think one of the conversations that comes up in terms of policymaking is what's the threshold for renewables coming onto the grid at which, it's no longer of the benefit that we all think it is. And I think that those conversations are going on all over the country. So I'm just curious if you could speak to the reliability piece and how you view those assets coming online in terms of, we're now able to all talk of them as load reducers, but how much load reduction can we sustain, and how do you guys view it in terms of the stability of the grid?
Thank you, Representative McGee. A good question. Reliability really is job one for us from the time that we were created as an organization. It was to make sure we operate and plan the system reliably for the 6 New England states. When we think about renewables, we don't think of renewables any differently than any other technology that would come onto the grid. So we take our independence very seriously. We're technology neutral when it comes to resources. So any resource that wants to tie into the bulk power system, we would study the interconnection of that project. And you may have heard of the queue that the ISO maintains, the generator interconnection study queue. It's like when you go to the deli and you want to place your order, you pull a number and you get your queue position. And so we do that for every project that wants to tie into the grid. Historically, those have been the large gas-fired plants, but now we're seeing that for wind farms, and we're starting to see it for some large solar arrays in the region. So when a project comes forward, we want to study it to make sure that it will have no adverse impact on the reliability of the rest of the grid or anybody connected to it. So the test is no adverse impact. And if we do detect that there are problems, we could require the developer to upgrade substations or transmission facilities in the area to make sure it can connect reliably. We don't want anybody plugging into the grid and causing problems for other entities. So that's been part of our responsibility since the beginning. It continues to be, and we wouldn't let an asset of any kind connect to the grid if it were to cause reliability problems. But if you think about the small distributed resources, the solar PV, we don't have any decision-making in that area at all. We simply see the load reduction, and there's no resource that's wired into our system. It just shows up as the reduction. So if you think about the typical load profile in the region, everybody wakes up, in the early morning hours, and the demand for power builds throughout the day. And one of the challenges that we see with operating a system with growing penetration of solar PV resources is that you are increasing the ramp of power that you need in the afternoon as the solar goes offline. So we're able to manage that. There's always been a ramp between the afternoon and the evening, but because the solar PV has brought the demand on the grid down so significantly on a sunny day, it's created a steeper ramp to the evening peak. So we need to make sure we have resources that are flexible and fast enough to be able to come on as the solar is going offline. And if you'll pardon me for just 1 minute, I have to go let the dog out. I'm sorry, I'll be right back. He's in charge right now.
Okay.
I guess we can talk amongst ourselves.
Representative Thomas will be recognized next. Okay, Representative Thomas, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, is Mr. Johnson back ready to hear my question?
No. Oh,
yes.
Yes.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, thank you. Yes, this deviates slightly from the subject, but you mentioned reliability. My question involves, in terms of the pandemic and people currently working more at home, and in terms of the fact that in the last several years, the New England region has done a lot to increase its reliability through ISO New England. There have been a lot of projects, reliability projects that have come on, which of course all of the states share in those projects. Do you see a ramping down of those reliability projects coming soon? And how would you comment on how they will be affecting the overall electric bills of the ordinary citizens as these projects come down, and also in relationship to whether or not you may see more people working from home in terms of use of electricity? What the point I'm getting at is, as we attempt to do some policy making to try to reduce the cost of electricity to our constituents, are we looking at skewed data, and are we going to overreact, or do you see where do you see that the states may need to want to go in terms of reducing people's electric bills, knowing that all of these past data might be coming down, that we're at the tail end of these things? If you understand my question correctly, it's kind of convoluted, but there's a lot of moving parts in there.
Okay, maybe you could just clarify, Representative Thomas, the point about reliability projects coming down. I just want to make sure I understood that reference.
There have been many projects throughout New England to improve reliability. A case in point recently in New Hampshire was the Merrimack Valley Reliability Project. And a lot of these projects were done, I'm pretty sure, because of the big ice storm we had many years ago. People were without power for many days. And a lot of reliability efforts were done at the time to make sure that didn't happen again. My understanding is that the amount of projects that were being done have gone over the hump, and we're now on the downswing as far as finishing up these projects. So perhaps there won't be as many reliability projects being done within the region. Therefore, the costs of those projects will be coming down, is what I was getting at. So where do you see us going in the next, say, 2 to 3 years in terms of what we can do for policymaking, while not using the past data as potentially a skewed data, because we've been high in the region, but we've been high for many reasons. Where do you see us coming forward? Are we going to be overreacting, or should we be using that past data to judge where we need to go?
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks for the clarification. The reliability projects that New England has invested in over the past decade total about $10 billion, round numbers. And that's the cost of building and then maintaining the bulk power system. And then the costs of that are allocated along the lines of the percentages we talked about earlier. We're coming really to the end of the build out of most of those reliability projects. We have about $2 billion of projects that are still planned and part of our system. We don't see significant transmission required for reliability beyond that. The exception might be if we see the retirement of a large generating resource that provided support to the grid in a certain area. We may have to restudy the system without that asset, and that could trigger a need for transmission. We did see that in the Boston area when the Mystic generating units retired. So we had to make some transmission reinforcements. But we're not going to see an indefinite growth in reliability-based projects. That's our current view. We do expect, based on what the states in the region are looking at for renewable and clean energy, there may be a build out of transmission to achieve those policy goals, but that would not be based on a reliability need, and those costs would not be shared based on the reliability formula that we have today. The second observation I would make is that the pandemic did bring about a reduction in electricity demand initially. So about a year ago, in the March timeframe, we saw electric demand in the region drop by 3 to 5%. And we weren't sure how that trend would be sustained because we had no data historically to show how the country and the region responds to a pandemic like this. But we actually saw the demand on the grid come back pretty significantly and somewhat higher than expected when it got warm in the June and July timeframe last summer. So we kind of rebounded as a region in terms of the electricity consumption. And you can imagine people left their offices, but you're still seeing the electricity demand at the office building at the same time. Now all the employees are using electricity at their home. So what happened in a sense is the electricity demand just got spread around more, and it's probably less efficient that way than to have people power down at home and then power up at the office. In effect, we're powering up, multiple locations. And I think that's just a reality for the present. Hopefully that will change. But we do see us coming to the end of the build out of the reliability project. So we shouldn't see transmission costs, which have risen. We don't expect those to grow at that rate indefinitely.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Chair? Yes, thank you. So I guess what I'm looking at is there do you have projections that there will be more generation and power needed in the future, or will we soon be back to somewhat pre-transmission days and perhaps pre-pandemic days, or do you see a rise in the need for more generation?
Good question. The long-term forecast that we do is updated every year in the springtime and published on May 1st. It's part of a forecast called the Capacity Energy Load and Transmission Report, the CELT report. That looks out for 10 years. And we look at really two dimensions of the forecast. What's the peak for the region, and what's the total energy consumption across all 8,760 hours in a year. And for both of those forecasts, we expect that the consumption will essentially be flat for the region. And that's driven in large part by the energy efficiency across the states and the solar PV. They've really brought down the demand for power. If you look beyond the 10-year horizon, we're anticipating that as you electrify transportation, as you have more and more people driving plug-in vehicles that need to charge on the grid, and as you shift away from fossil fuels for heating and building heating to electrification, which I think is the direction the region is headed, that will add more demand to the grid. So I think we've been in a period for the first 20 years of the ISO where we saw steady growth, and then it's leveling off over the next 10 years. And then I expect it will grow again as we electrify more and more
parts of our economy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Oxenham is recognized for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for taking my question, and thank you. Is it Mr. Johnson or Mr. Greenland?
Eric Johnson.
Eric Johnson. Thank you very much. Yes, we met when we were all down at ISO. Thank you.
Yes.
If I could take us back to the earlier discussion, I think we're left with sort of two different ideas, and let me explain that we've had presentations from DES, as you know, Mike Fitzgerald and Chris Skogland, and the chair of the Air Division's Resource Board. And their numbers vary from yours. And I think it's probably because you have the broader New England perspective, whereas they focus very directly on what's happening in New Hampshire. And when we were in your offices down there in Holyoke, we were presented with graphs that showed all the other states in New England were decreasing total load and decreasing peak demand. And as you just suggested, that had a lot to do with very aggressive policies in favor of renewable energy and energy efficiency. And New Hampshire was the outlier. New Hampshire was still increasing its load and increasing its peak demand. And it was pointed out to us there, and as I said, by our DES experts, that because of the actions of others who are declining in load and peak, and even if we were simply to plateau our usage, we would still, over time, and this is looking forward, not looking at historical numbers, we would necessarily have to be taking a larger share of the total because our share would be getting bigger. And the numbers, as I don't have the, you pointed out 9.5% has been our sort of average usage. They were suggesting that we would be over 10%. And I believe that was in the next 5 to 10 years. And that with every 1/10 of 1% that goes up, we are talking about additional millions of dollars in monies that would have to be provided out of New Hampshire to make up the share that others would not have. So that, I think that's where our questions about what is the effect of renewable energy, I'll just leave it there. Having provided that background to the controversy within our committee, it might be helpful to you to revisit that, the point that you were making. It's inconsistent to think that our share would stay the same while all of our partners are decreasing their load and decreasing their peak, and we are not.
Yeah, it's a good observation. I'm not directly familiar with the data that might have been presented by DES, and if they have information, I'd be happy to look at it and compare it with what we've seen. We only are able to measure what's the demand showing up on the transmission system itself. So it's not as though we can see load in layers where there's in real time the demand for electricity and then the impact of solar and then the impact of energy efficiency. It's not metered that way. And when you look into our control room, they have no visibility on that. So I think the only way you can get at this is to do some sort of analysis after the fact of how much you're spending on energy efficiency. And you probably need to know what the other states are spending on energy efficiency and compare that to your load. So the numbers would not originate from the ISO other than what your total consumption is. I think that might be one of the challenges for us providing the answer to you, but I would be happy to work with you offline to examine any data that you have to the extent that's helpful.
Thank you so much. And I also think the notion of you looking at the historical data and them projecting forward, I think that also may be a bit of our differences here.
Yes, that could
Thank you so much.
Yep.
I'll follow up with you.
All right.
Representative Somsich is recognized for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for being here and making yourself available. You probably know that one of the biggest discussion points here in New Hampshire when it comes to electric bills has been the dramatic increase in transmission costs. And this is something that the Representative Thomas mentioned. I think over the last 10 years, the portion of our electric bill that has been increasing most dramatically has been transmission costs. The energy fuel supply costs are pretty low and they've been stable. In fact, they've been going down over the years. But the transmission costs continue to rise pretty dramatically from a small amount maybe 10 years ago to a significant amount right now. So Representative Thomas was asking just a minute ago whether you expect that increase to decrease the increase of transmission costs. I think you said you do expect that to be a slighter slope than it has been in the past. Is that correct?
Yes. So if we think back to the time frame when the ISO started operating the system, we began the planning process for reliability needs around 2000. And there had been very little transmission investment in New England for decades, really. And much of the investment had gone toward generation and the nuclear fleet as an example, but not much investment in transmission. And at that time, the demand for electricity was growing at 1 to 2% annually. So we were having to plan and build transmission infrastructure to catch up with the growing demand for power. And any transmission project we put in into our plan is so that we don't encounter violations of our reliability standards. As an example, as transmission lines get loaded up with demand, they heat up and they would sag. We need to make sure that the wires that we have in the system can handle that demand for electricity. We want to make sure that we meet the voltage and stability requirements that are set by the federal government and the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. So all of that transmission was designed to make sure we can meet the growing demand for power. And we've been able to do that effectively. And we know that the growth in demand has slowed. We expect it'll pick up over time. And the transmission costs then increased as well. So you went from paying for very little new investment to suddenly having to absorb the cost of $10 billion of investment. That's why you saw the transmission costs become a larger share of your electric bill. I'll make an analogy, it's my own. So as I think about it, if when you graduate from college and you're fortunate enough that your aunt gives you a hand-me-down vehicle and you're able to drive that around for a couple of years, your costs for operating that vehicle are minimal. But at some point you decide, okay, I need a vehicle that will carry me forward for the next couple of years reliably. Then you purchase a vehicle and then you have a car payment. So it's sort of like what happened in the early 2000 timeframe. The region had not been paying very much for transmission. Suddenly we needed to make this investment, and that became a larger share of the cost for your electric bill. We have always made sure that if we saw needs on the system go away, we could scale back or even cancel transmission projects, and we certainly have done that. So it's not an automatic that a transmission project that starts in the study phase will always be built. We're continuing to reassess what the needs are and modify our plan accordingly.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Follow up.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of the possible canceling of transmission. Since I'm a physicist, I've always had a lot of focus on how efficiently we use energy. But if I understand you correctly, the ISO's role does not involve how efficiently energy is being used. That's an area that is out of your responsibility. But I think about the analogy you mentioned about your own home, for example, that would be if you're managing a furnace but you're not managing the insulation of your home. That's a secondary issue. But as we know, if you insulate that home, you might need a smaller furnace and you don't need as much transmission, for example. So do you believe that maybe ISO at some point should set some kind of energy standard, energy efficiency standards? Because that directly impacts your generation and the transmission lines.
Thank you, Representative. Could you just clarify, do you mean energy efficiency standards for consumers and buildings?
Well, I'm being a little vague about it because I don't know exactly how you operate on this, but I'm thinking that standards that say, you know, if the energy that is being provided is being inefficiently used, wasted in a big way, should there not be some standards to say, you know, we're providing this energy through our transmission lines, and we expect you to use it efficiently, but there are no standards right now for that. Is there any kind of role for ISO in that area to say, in order for us to get transmission costs down, in order for us to get generation costs down for everybody in the region, one of the tools might be to have an efficient use of energy standard?
It's an interesting concept. I would say the ISO does not have any authority or jurisdiction to impose any type of a standard like that. That would be the responsibility of the federal government, which sets standards, or the building codes, the appliance efficiency standards. You know, states can set standards, but when we're serving demand on the grid, the ISO is only seeing the generation that's coming out of a power plant, moving across the wires and getting delivered to the distribution system. We don't see what's happening beyond that. So I couldn't tell you, and my operators couldn't tell you, that New England is very efficient or not efficient at all. I know that the region spends about $1 billion annually through ratepayer programs for energy efficiency. So we certainly are more efficient than we have been in the past. Those are things like weatherization, as probably one of the biggest example, lighting. Anytime you shift from one technology to another, you can reduce the total lighting load in the region. So those would be examples of improvements in efficiency, but I can't see the ISO having a role in setting those standards. We just don't have the expertise or the visibility on that side of the system.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Pimentel for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a ton of questions, but let me try if I could narrow it down. From what I understand, we lose a lot of energy in transmission. I have no idea what the percentage is, but I hear it's a lot. And I'm guessing it has a lot to do with just the distance that electricity has to travel. I think of myself, if I'm using an extension cord, the further I have to run power to get to what I want to do, the larger the gauge of wire I need to run, etc. Otherwise, the wire heats up and you're just losing energy all over the place. But so I guess my question is, how much power are we losing? Are there ways to mitigate that? I know I've heard about microgrids, and how would that fit into maybe reducing the lengths of transmission? If you could just comment on that generally. It's kind of a lot to talk about or think about all at once.
Thank you, Representative Pimentel. There are losses on the system. So if you are producing electricity at a power plant in Maine, for example, and that electricity is going to be delivered to a part of the system in Connecticut, there will be losses over that transmission system. Those losses are not large. That's a relative assessment. I think they're typically in the plus or minus 2 to 3% of the total system. And when we plan the system, when you have larger conductors, you reduce the amount of losses because there's less resistance for the current moving through that line. And that's something that we take stock of. I wouldn't say that there's a lot of energy being wasted in losses in the region. The only way to eliminate losses entirely, I suppose, would be to produce electricity on site where it's consumed. And a microgrid is an example of that, but I'm not sure that that's an economic model for a population of 14 million people. So that's my initial thought on the losses. And I think you had other questions. I'm happy to stay on, or I'll take my cue from the chair.
Follow up, Representative Pimentel. Don't forget to unmute. Don't forget to unmute.
That's encouraging to know. I had heard that the transmission losses were, in the, 10s or 20%, but a couple percent, that's not bad. So thank you for that information. I appreciate it.
Representative McGee is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just put my hand up. I wasn't expecting to be next. My question is a little more about scale of power. We have to consider and balance a number of different things, and we know that the system is complex. I know that there's been a decommissioning plan, which I really don't hear much about or know much about, but I know that when we closed, for example, Yankee, just over the border in Vermont, there was a significant economic impact in the region, and there's also sort of a loss of some clean energy baseload. So I'm trying to figure out how the ISO, what you have to say about the ISO's management of, our limited clean baseload resources that are on the grid, and how that affects the, again, reliability going forward. Because I know with some of those retirements, there were reports that came out of the ISO that said that the management of the reliability was becoming less stable. And I wonder if you could speak to that, because I think it's something we don't talk about very often, but I'd like to understand it better.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Representative. If you think about nuclear as a technology, at one point, I think New England had 9 reactors, so we had a significant amount of power coming from nuclear. The Vermont Yankee plant was one of the smaller reactors. I think it was about 600 megawatts, and they had a similar, the company owned a similar plant in Pilgrim that has also retired. And so we have seen a loss of some of the diversity of supply, but the ISO doesn't have a reliability standard for fuel mix or technology types. So we don't have the ability to retain a power plant like the Vermont Yankee. We could look at delaying the retirement of the project of the plant until we could reinforce the transmission system. And we've done that with some large power stations. We did that, as I mentioned, with the Mystic station, with the I think Brayton Point and Pilgrim may have had some upgrades that were needed, but we don't have the ability to keep a plant. So if a company says we're going to shut this plant down, we can try to prolong that for a very short period of time, and they can say no, and they can shut down the plant. So that does present some challenges, but we have been in discussions with the states about, what's the future of the resource mix, and we expect over time it will be some nuclear will remain on the system. You folks have one of the plants in New Hampshire. Millstone is the other one. We'll have natural gas fired generation, and then we'll have a growing amount of renewable energy. It will probably be more of a challenge for the states in terms of their clean energy goals as well. And again, that's not something that falls under the ISO's jurisdiction. It's really the states that have decided they want a certain portion of their resource mix to come from clean or renewable sources of energy. But anytime a plant wants to connect to the grid, we study it. Anytime they want to retire from the grid, we study that too. But there are limits to the tools that we have in our toolbox if a large power station wants to go away.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Oxman for a question.
I think my question was answered. Thank you very much.
Representative Platt is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got two questions, actually. One is the increase in transmission, the 10 billion you mentioned over the last 10 years. Is that just dead weight cost, or is there offsetting concomitant benefit, such as reduction in congestion charges and cost of lost power that is avoided?
Representative Platt, that's a great question. We have seen significant reductions in other costs as a result of the upgrades we've done for reliability. And when I say we, it's really the transmission companies have built those projects. There was significant congestion in the system, the ability to move the cheapest priced power around the network. And as we've reinforced the transmission system, we've seen more ability for the lowest price resources to move around the grid. So that's clearly a benefit. We also had hundreds of millions of dollars in reliability agreements for individual power plants. And as we developed the transmission system, particularly in Southwest Connecticut, as an example, we saw those reliability agreements expire. So there certainly have been benefits that have gone along with that. I do have some data on that, and I would be happy to submit that to the committee as a follow-up.
Thank you. The other one, isn't it true because we have a market, or we didn't used to have a market, and ISO knowingly came about the time of the formation of the market, that you have that you have to build more transmission under a market condition than you would under the old system of utilities building generation, because they could build it where they needed it to avoid transmission.
I don't have an answer to that. I would be speculating. So you're asking me to compare one model to the other, and I don't feel like I have a.
I will aver that that's the case. That rather than building a replacement, say for the Braden Point, you had to reinforce transmission. Same thing with Mystic. You have to build transmission rather than build another plant there, because you don't know another plant will be built there.
Okay, if in that example, transmission is the tool that we have to ensure a reliable system if a resource retires. It is true that in a vertically integrated system, the planners might decide that they want to invest in a new power plant at that site instead of building transmission. But we don't have the ability to plan generation the way we do the transmission system.
Thank you, Representative Platt. I remind you, we're here to ask questions, not debate. Representative Bernardi is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I was delighted to hear in your response to Mr. Pimentel that losses from wheeling is around 2% going from Maine to Connecticut on high transmission lines like the transmission system of ISO has. Are you aware, does that same loss amount apply to when we step down to the distribution side of the list? We're now looking at power losses in the distribution grid. Is it still at that low amount, or because because of the smaller wires, we're seeing increased distribution losses. And the reason I asked this question is because you mentioned, and this committee has discussed the concept of, transportation moving to electrified vehicles. And now we're positioning ourselves to say, well, that is going to be a net cost saving or a net benefit to the economy. I am not sure that if we have significant distribution losses that we gain that benefit. But I don't know if that's within your wheelhouse to answer that question either.
I'm not an engineer, and I wouldn't want to speculate. I think the best source of information would be one of the distribution companies, PSNH, for example. They can tell you what the losses would be between the point we drop power off at the distribution system and where they deliver it to the end use customer. We just don't have visibility on that system.
Thank you.
Representative Brezhnev is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for taking my question. You mentioned that transportation is expected to become the largest share of electric demand increase over the next decade. If Massachusetts, which is a much larger state with 77,000 miles of road, compared to New Hampshire, which only has 16,000 miles of road, would you project that as everyone moves to electrified transportation, that electric demand in Massachusetts would accelerate much faster than in New Hampshire, and therefore their percentage of the load would go up faster than New Hampshire's percentage of the load? Thank you.
It's possible. You're asking me to speculate on something. We don't know how quickly the states are going to deploy electric vehicles over time. We're starting to forecast that on an annual basis. We're in the second year of developing that forecast, but the numbers are based on limited data. I mean, if you ask any people in a group how many drive an electric vehicle, you get a couple hands going up. The question is how many people will be driving an electric vehicle in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? We hope to have better information about that over time. Our information is somewhat limited right now.
Follow up.
Yeah, I guess so. My question isn't so much how quickly this would happen. It's more of the relationship between, assuming that New Hampshire and Massachusetts electrify their transportation at around the same rate. Would Massachusetts, because they're a much larger state, their demand for electricity would go up much faster than New Hampshire? Do you project that sort of relationship?
We don't make a projection of that relationship, but if I consider your hypothetical, I think the answer is yes. That assumes that the demand for satisfying the demand for electric vehicles is coming from the grid itself. We also don't know if customers are using on-site solar, or if they're using a battery to bank energy during the day from the grid and discharge it in the morning when they go to work. So there are other variables in that equation. But it is possible if they do a rapid deployment of electric vehicles, they would see more demand on the grid than New Hampshire, assuming that you don't.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Okay, the chair recognizes Representative Cretion for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's actually, I guess, 2 points or items, I guess, related to that. I just wanted to mention, I saw in the New York Times, they had a really interesting infographic about the pace of electrified vehicle adoption and how long it'll take existing vehicles to get off the road that I thought people might be interested in. I also wanted to question mileage of road as the best proxy for miles driven or transportation energy use. I think it's probably more dependent on number of cars and miles driven than just the miles of road that are available. I don't know if those numbers are comparable, but I just suggest to Mr. Brezhny that you might want to look at that as well or instead.
Was there a question there?
No.
Oh, okay, thank you. Representative Thomas, you still have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Mr. Johnson, let's get back to transmission for a second. First of all, I just want to make a comment. Interestingly enough, or not too surprisingly, on your ISO New England app, it's demand and real-time wholesale energy prices have been zero throughout New England for the last half an hour at least. Interesting statistic there. My question goes back to transmission to clarify the transmission costs that show up on our electric bills provided by our electric utility company. Those costs are totally dictated by ISO New England in terms of what their share is to charge the customers, or does the electric utility have any additional input into what the cost of the transmission is when it shows up on your bill?
Yeah, the ISO does not dictate that. The rate that's charged, the regional network service rate that's charged, is developed by the transmission owners, the transmission companies across New England. They bring that to FERC. FERC approves it, and then those costs are essentially passed through to end-use customers, and there's a role for the states in authorizing those charges on the end-use customer's bill. At that point, I don't think the states have any specific control over that. It's just authorizing it to go on the electric bill, but the ISO does not dictate the cost. We simply show what the regional network load is for each of the transmission companies, and that's, as I mentioned, that gets rolled up into the states. So this is more of a decision that's between the transmission companies and the proceeding at FERC than the ISO. We certainly have a role in identifying the transmission that's needed, and we do that through our planning process. We seek to develop transmission that's cost effective, but when it comes to the billing and determining the cost allocation, that's not specifically an ISO role.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Follow up.
Okay, I'm trying to get to the bottom of a lot of people when they talk about the fact that our transmission costs are up, and as you can imagine, there are a lot of fingers pointing both ways when they talk about this. So, based on what you said, so when the local electric company goes to get its rate approved, they have it done through our PUC here in the state, but you mentioned FERC. Now, I guess, are you telling me that it's all rolled up in the cost of doing business, but FERC has to approve certain costs that the electric utility can bring before the PUC as part of their rate adjustment? And plus, I'm sure they would be added in there their regulated profit margin as well. I'm just trying to get a handle on just who decides and what input there is on the actual cost of transmission. Is it who determines that? What are all the factors? I mean, we're being told one side is responsible because they're perhaps not managing efficiently, or the other side is saying that no, it's not us, it's what we're being told to charge by other entities. I'm trying to get my finger on how transmission costs are actually established.
Okay, so it's a good question. If you back up a little bit and you take the bulk transmission system that's in service or planned or under construction, there's a cost for that that's essentially financed over time, somewhat like a mortgage. You don't buy a house for cash, you pay for it over time. So the transmission system is built and financed over time. The costs for recovering that investment is done through a rate that the transmission companies bring to FERC, because we're talking about transmission that's engaged in interstate commerce effectively. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm speaking generally. So FERC approves that rate, and then the cost of that transmission are brought to the public utility commissions essentially, and they say, we have the FERC approval for this component of the transmission of the customer's bill, and then that gets added into the retail customer's bill. So the states are not directly approving the transmission cost. It's a pass through based on something that was approved at FERC. And the folks at the Public Utility Commission would be the best ones to explain how that comes through in a rate case, because they see that directly. The ISO does not see the retail billing side of it, because our customers are not end-use customers. Our customers are the transmission companies. So we might have to talk offline and look at some numbers to unpack those questions a little bit more. But there are essentially FERC approvals for some components of the bill and state PUC approvals for other components of the bill.
Okay, thank you. It clarifies it somewhat for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Partial is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Chairman, for taking my question and for inviting our guests today. It's very informative. I've been looking a little bit, trying to get my mind around the idea of these rejected energy that seems to play a percentage in all of our neighboring states and in New Hampshire as well. And a subject that came up earlier in our discussions earlier this session was the idea of battery backup. Is that really a technology that we can really apply right now? Is that being applied anywhere aside from there's that one plant in Massachusetts that pumps water up and down? Is there any other real viable use of that technology at this point that you're aware of?
Thank you, Representative Partial. We have batteries that have been in existence for a number of years, the pump storage that you mentioned, but we also have a very sizable amount of battery storage technology that's been proposed. And I know this is an issue that Representative Oxenham brings up, and I had the numbers. I was ready for her question. So write this down, Representative. 3,635 megawatts of battery storage under study in New England. Battery storage a couple years ago was in the kind of miscellaneous category when you look in the queue. And I remember when I would report to her that the number was up to 50 megawatts, and she was very excited. So now we're at over 3,000. So those projects are being put forward by developers who see an opportunity to charge those batteries at one point in the day and discharge those batteries at another point in the day. They might be doing that based on what's happening with price. We would call that arbitrage within the market. They may be doing that because they're paired with a renewable resource. So maybe you have more energy than the grid needs coming from renewables. So you charge the battery with wind power or solar power. But we are seeing significant quantities of battery storage start to show up in the region.
Thank you. Want to follow up?
Follow up.
Thank you again. And if we can increase our battery storage capacity, then we would be decreasing the amount of rejected energy that we have, and we would be providing both more stability and smaller carbon footprint at the same time. Is that a correct assumption?
If you're using a battery itself is not emitting electricity or it's not emitting any environmental characteristics. It depends on what it's being charged with. So if it's just being charged from the grid, then when it's discharged, the output of that battery is really whatever was operating on the grid at the time. It's a mix. If it's not connected to the grid, but it's connected on the customer side of the meter, then it would be charging with the solar array that might be on the rooftop. Or if it's a wind project, it would be charged with the wind. And then the battery would be discharging renewable energy because that was its source. So I think you always have to look at how is the battery configured on the system? Is it tied directly to a customer, or is it tied directly to the grid? And we're starting to see both.
May I ask one more follow-up question? I do apologize.
One more. Go ahead.
Yes. But if we are, maybe I do not understand the concept of rejected electric, rejected production. But if we are, if we have an excess at certain points that we're not able to accommodate on our grid, but if we're able to capture that, doesn't that provide more, at least more stability? I understand the batteries are they're not neutral, they're not green, they're not carbon. I understand that part of the concept, but I'm thinking about the amount of electricity they're producing that is rejected. And I guess I don't quite understand that concept. Maybe you could clarify that for me.
The concept of rejected, could you just clarify what you mean? It's not a term that we refer to with the grid.
Okay, I was looking at a document, John Mann in particular, maybe he can step in if he understands this. My understanding is there's overproduction at certain times of the cycle. And that overproduction that goes nowhere, basically.
So actually that doesn't happen. We don't have overproduction on the system. If we did, we would have a problem in our control center because they need to make sure that the supply and demand are in balance constantly. If there's an overproduction of power, what happens is we start exporting power to our neighbors that they're not expecting. And they're going to call us and say, New England, what's going on? Why are you sending us more power than you have scheduled? So we never run more generation than we need. It's possible this may be related to, let's say, a wind farm, for example. We don't have the ability to ramp them up and down the way we would have other resources, but there may be times when there's more wind production capability than the grid demands, and we would have to curtail those resources. So that might be what the concept of rejected energy is. But
okay, perhaps what it is. Thank you for your answer. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Representative Mann is recognized for a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My thought about the rejected energy, it was that it was energy that could not be turned into useful purposes. For example, heat energy in a locomotive, or friction, things like that. I'm pretty sure that was the point of the graph. I've always assumed that. Let's put it that way. These are I can't remember the name of the federal that uses those graphs, but they're kind of interesting. So, sorry?
Is the Lawrence Berkeley Lab?
Yeah, Berkeley.
So Livermore, maybe.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just a brief follow-up, if I may, on that question.
Sure, go ahead.
If you think about the generation technologies, we have a couple of examples of gas turbines. One is the simple cycle turbine, where you put fuel into the system, much like a jet engine. But we've also developed a significant amount of combined cycle resources. And so rather than simply ejecting the waste in the form of heat, they capture that heat and return it to the system, and the efficiency of that power plant goes up significantly. So what we've seen in New England is generation technologies have moved toward more efficient use of that heat. That's on the grid system. And then I know within many municipal systems, they use heat waste for steam loops and other purposes that are separate from the grid. Thank you, Representative Mann, for clarifying what the concept was.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Representative Samsic is recognized for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. A little while back, you were talking about like future projections that ISO is seeing. And I want to get back to that in the context of your responsibilities for transmission. Number one, right now, I see currently, very imminently, one of the issues I'm sure you're working on right now is internet security and resiliency of the grid, because that's becoming more and more important everywhere, and that's immediately needed now. But in the medium term, like was mentioned before about transportation, it's not just about electric vehicles, but basically a lot of vehicles are now hybrid. So they're using some electricity as well as some gas, but we're moving more and more to all electric vehicles. So that potentially will be a bigger demand in the future. And then further into the future, you're going to be seeing huge amounts possibly of generation of offshore wind into the grid. So are those areas all being considered at ISO right now?
I think the short answer is yes. In terms of the grid security and cybersecurity, that's something we take very seriously. We work very closely with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, and every 2 years we run a major exercise called GridX, and it's a simulation of physical and cyber attacks on the power grid in North America. And it's a way for us in a controlled environment, separate from the actual grid, to test our processes and procedures and our ability to operate the system when it's under attack. So there's continuous learning from those types of exercises. For those who have been down to visit the ISO, you know that you have to get security clearance in advance to come through the gate. There's a physical perimeter security with a guard. We essentially have that same perimeter around the network that's operating the system. So ISO New England may have a corporate website, but that website is not tied to the control center that's actually operating the grid. So I just want to assure you that the grid itself is not hosted on the internet. It's a completely separate network with significant cybersecurity controls around it. And we know that the cyber threats are continuing to evolve, so we need to continually talk to our colleagues. We talk with the FBI, Homeland Security, to make sure we understand what are the emerging threats and how can we take actions to stop those attacks from penetrating our system and mitigating the consequences. So we take that very seriously. The other question was about offshore wind, and offshore wind used to be kind of a smaller slice of what's in the ISO queue. It's now the dominant resource. So we have over 15,000 megawatts of wind that's proposed in New England. Much of it's in southern New England, the Massachusetts area. There's offshore leases that have been designated for development of offshore wind. And so we work with all of the developers to interconnect those projects on shore. And then we're also working with the New England states who are looking much longer term at the 2050 timeframe to understand what kind of transmission would you need to interconnect large quantities of offshore wind, even more than what's being studied today. And we're evaluating that currently with the New England states, and be happy to keep the committee apprised of that study effort. Those are the two concepts I recall from the question. If there were others,
No,
maybe you could.
thank you very much, Mr. Johnson.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Bernardi is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Delighted to hear about your efforts in cybersecurity, but interested in understanding what work ISO is doing to harden us from EMP.
Yeah, so you're talking about electromagnetic pulse, and this is something that we've worked very closely with FERC, our federal regulator, and there are working groups that are continually evaluating those risks. The equipment in the field is not owned by the ISO, so we don't own any transmission or generation. So the assets that could be impacted by an EMP or some type of geomagnetic disturbance, they're not our assets. So we can't harden them directly. So we have to work with the owners of those assets and the industry to find ways to do that. Short of dropping a Faraday cage over the entirety of New England, there will be risks. And there are things that have been done to harden that network. We watch the solar forecast, not just for solar panels, but what's the activity on the sun, and track when there are solar storms so we can anticipate how that might impact the bulk transmission system. And this gets into some really interesting physics around the location of the pole on the Earth, and the further north you go, the greater the risk is for some of the geomagnetic activity. And I know that the folks in Maine have looked at this very closely. So the short answer is we work with our regulators to assess this. We work with the industry, but it's a challenge for us to actually harden the assets since we don't own them directly.
Follow-up? Is there any discussions with the suppliers about having the big transformers that would be potentially destroyed by an EMP and knock out our whole electric system, having them have standbys available in case of that eventuality?
It's a good question. I understand that there are stockpiles of transformers that the utilities companies have access to. Of course, the challenge might be if the impacts are widespread, how do you decide who is able to access those stockpiles? It's really a question for the utility companies that own that equipment. They, I'm sure, have plans. I just would be speculating if I said how they would deal with that in New Hampshire or any of the other New England states.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Oxenham is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd very much like to thank Mr. Johnson for thinking of me and preparing that information on battery storage. And my second point is that, as we look forward and as ISO is planning forward over the next 10 and 30 years, we have to leave room for innovation. I mean, battery storage, the batteries themselves are changing, the conformation is changing. And I think that as we go forward, we always have to leave room for the excitement of that R&D that's coming online, new resources that are coming online. And with each step, we have taken really qualitatively order of magnitude changes in terms of efficiency. And that is really the nub that we have been able, when we moved from wood to fossil fuels, there was a tremendous efficiency jump. And moving away from fossil fuels now to new forms and new technologies, that new efficiency is going to allow us all these uses of beneficial electrification and EVs that so often we get bogged down in worrying, oh, where are we going to find that? They're coming along in it won't always be perfect. It won't always be in sync. There are going to be discontinuities, but I for one, am very optimistic about this. And and just wanted to really reach out and thank you for your presentation today. It was very enlightening.
Thank you.
Representative McGee is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I echo, thank you so much, Mr. Johnson, for coming and speaking with us today. This has been great. I attended the ISO New England 10-year strategy session in 2019, and it struck me at that meeting that we have, ISO is dedicated to a specific aspect of our reliability for the grid, which makes perfect sense. And other entities are responsible for different aspects. As you mentioned, your interactions with FERC and with suppliers and transmission, the people who basically support the transmission, the physicality of the transmission portion of the grid. So I wonder if you could say something about whether the siloed nature of the work that we do with the grid actually presents part of the risk that we face, because I think it's one of those things where, well, we don't do that. So I just wonder how much of a risk are we assuming by the fact that the responsibility for maintaining the security is siloed?
That's a good observation. When you talk about security, are you referring to cybersecurity or simply the general security of having enough resources to meet the demand for power? I just want to make sure I understand the question.
The former.
Yeah. So there is an effort in the region where the ISO coordinates with the New England states on cybersecurity. And there is discussion among the New England Conference of Public Utilities Commissioners, or NECPUC, Chair Diane Martin and her colleagues at the PUC are part of that. In the past, we've worked directly with Commissioner Bob Scott, who was the cybersecurity lead, and there are other people who are part of that regional discussion from other states. So there is communication between the ISO and the state regulators, so they understand the risks that we see, and they provide insights that they have from the work that they're doing within their states. We coordinate with the National Guard, the FBI, Homeland Security. So it may appear siloed, but there's a pretty extensive coordination between the ISOs and our peers in the industry. We talk to all the other ISOs about this, asking what kind of risks that they see for the region. Could they potentially spill over to New England? The FBI provides alerts to us. If we detect problems, we share that with the FBI, and they have a network to share that information as well. So it's probably not as siloed as you might think, but we have to be cautious about how we share that information externally, so we're not unwittingly providing a blueprint to somebody who might want to do something to attack the grid.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Good question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. I know you've talked about this already, the anticipated build out, or in relation to Representative Breshney's question about the build out of electric vehicles and the increase on the load. But can you also talk for a moment about the build out of solar projects and other such projects in Massachusetts, and how they'll affect transmission costs that won't be included or reflected in regional costs?
If we think about the solar that's been built recently, I don't know if you're allowed to do this on Zoom, but I'll hold up a chart. I feel like Ross Perot. All right. So here's a chart, if I get this right. This shows the growth in solar in New England. The small number in this chart is back in the beginning, there was 40 megawatts of solar. And in the region, we now have a forecast of almost 8,000 megawatts of solar. And then we can break that down by state. And I'll provide this to the committee so you have the data. But Massachusetts has 100,000 installations of solar as of December 2020. New Hampshire has 10,000. So that gives you a sense of the relative scale. They've already installed a lot of solar. We have numbers for the other states as well. Connecticut, Massachusetts tend to be the leaders on the development of solar PV. So if you think about what's happening, they would effectively potentially reduce the demand on the electric grid by installing that solar, because the customers are using power from the panels rather than from the grid. So that could reduce their share of that regional network load as those solar panels come online. Now, the transmission costs, keep in mind, are allocated on a monthly basis. So the amount of solar production you get in the darker days of the winter might be different than in the spring, summer, and fall. So you probably would have to look at snapshots throughout the year to get a better sense of that. But to the extent you are installing solar panels on the customer side of the meter, it would be reducing the demand on the grid. And that does have the potential to reduce their share of the transmission costs at the regional level.
So to follow up on that question, in the winter, when solar panels are not producing very much electricity, would Massachusetts' share of transmission load go up as opposed to in the summertime when there is a lot of solar available?
I would say that's possible, but I'd have to go back and look at some of the numbers on that before I make a projection about that. I'd be happy to give that some further thought.
Okay, so just one more follow-up. If the upgrades that are needed to connect all this solar to the grid run in the hundreds of millions of dollars, does that affect transmission costs at all, or is that strictly a local distribution cost issue?
Well, there would not be any cost to interconnect solar behind the meter that would be allocated to the region. Those would be a distribution charge under the jurisdiction of each individual state. And if you had a large solar project, let's say 200 megawatts, that wanted to connect to the system, if they needed to upgrade the network to accommodate the interconnection, the developer pays those costs. So I don't see any place where the cost of interconnecting solar would be allocated to customers at the regional level.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any further questions for Mr. Johnson? Seeing none, Mr. Johnson, I want to thank you heartily on behalf of the full committee for taking time to be with us today and answering all our questions and helping us understand just how costs on the transmission grid affect the cost on our electric bill. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I always enjoy the conversation and look forward to meeting with you again.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so it is now 11:30 and we have no further formal business to conduct. I would ask, does anybody have anything that they would like to discuss informally? If not, then, Representative Oxen, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I just wondered if we might want to put forward a date for another meeting, just in case one of these opportunities should arise for another presentation or something on a retained bill in terms of an expert. Because we have to get the room allocated and all that.
Well, based on the allocation of rooms and Zoom licenses, ST&E is assigned to Mondays. So we could probably get this room on Monday for any one of the next several weeks. We can occasionally get it on Friday, depending on how other committees' schedules are running. So I will look into that and see what days are available. And it'd be, at this point, problematic for me to try to schedule a day without having a presentation already in hand. That would be kind of a waste of resources, so.
It's also hard to get someone to make an appointment with you when you can't offer them a date.
Understood, but that's part of the coordination that we have to do to make these presentations happen. So we'll.
Thank you so much.
And try to get something going. If you have any suggestions, Representative Oxenham, of presentations you'd like to hear, be sure to share those with me in email, and I will see if I can make those happen.
Will do.
Representative Callie Pitts. Don't forget to unmute. You're still muted.
We have, and I want to apologize for leaving the meeting, but do we have anything coming over from the Senate yet?
Nothing has been assigned.
Are you aware of anything?
No, nothing has been assigned to us yet.
Not yet. So that would be the end of April. We're looking at the end of April or mid-April?
No, I anticipate that we will be assigned some bills before then. Crossover is officially now April
9th.
I believe.
9th.
April 9th.
Last session day.
So there will be, most of the bills will come over after April 9th, but I've been told that some of them will get here before that. But I don't have any exact dates, so I can't make any concrete plans at this point.
I was just wondering if anything had dribbled over yet. Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure dribbling is how they'll get here, but although it is March Madness time, the NCAA basketball tournament is ongoing. So.
Right, and we are but my concern is school vacation week is coming up. And that's the last week in April. And I wondered how busy we were going to be that last week in April. So just.
Okay, we'll try to.
Some of us still have little ones around.
I believe that's last week in March, not April. Is that correct? School week?
Vacation?
Yeah.
Nope.
April.
Yeah.
Definitely April. Yeah.
I don't have any kids in school, so I'm not sure, but I think it's
April.
I have grandkids in New York and they have it the last week in March.
Yeah, but
So-
we're in April. New
But
York
we're in
gets
April. We're the last week in April. Yes.
New York gets Passover and Easter off, so they take that whole big.
Yep.
Have a good weekend, everybody. Hope it gets warmer.
Okay, I guess we're done. You everybody have a great weekend, and thanks for being here today. And I'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you, Chairman.